Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Labella Associates, dedicated to the pursuit of partnership for more than 40 years, offering services in the development of buildings, infrastructure, environmental, and energy projects. Labella, powered by partnership. LabellaPC.com.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour was made last week when the Rochester City School District announced the hiring of a new superintendent. The board chose Eric J. Rosser, who comes to Rochester after spending 5 years as the superintendent in Poughkeepsie. Rosser will be leaving Poughkeepsie City Schools to start in Rochester July 1st, exactly a year after interim superintendent Demario Strickland stepped in, and following the resignation of Carmine Peluso last year, who left Rochester to take the head job in Churchville-Chili. Rosser has a Ph.D. from SUNY Buffalo. He's also worked at Buffalo Public Schools, Atlanta Public Schools, at the D.C. Office of the State Superintendent of Education in D.C. He's new to Rochester, and there is a bit of odd symmetry here. Several years ago, Terry Dade pulled the ripcord and left Rochester after just a year, heading for the Cornwall School District in the eastern part of the state, the Hudson Valley. Rosser comes to Rochester from the district that was only about half an hour away from where Dade is serving. The Rochester City School Board is hoping this hire will finally, at long last, bring stability to the position. But the vote was not unanimous. Rosser was selected by a vote of 4-2. One board member, the former board president, Cynthia Elliott, was not present and did not vote. Two board members, former board vice president Beatrice LeBron, as well as Commissioner Isaiah Santiago, voted against the hire. This hour we'll ask them why, and why their choice might have been someone already within the district. Santiago made headlines when he was elected at the age of 19, the youngest Rochester board member ever. Last week, Santiago was back in the headlines because his colleague on the board, James Patterson, has petitioned New York State for Santiago's removal. Patterson says that Santiago has used racial slurs in heated confrontations. Santiago has countered that Patterson has repeatedly called him boy and demeaned him because of his relative youth. This hour, we're going to talk about these issues, but not just these issues. Our guests want to talk about everything from Project 2025 to the health of the district and a lot more, and let me welcome them now. Beatrice LeBron, Rochester City School Board Commissioner, welcome back to the program. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Isaiah Santiago, welcome back to you. Thanks for being with us.
Glad to be on.
And to be clear to listeners, you recently heard the president and the vice president of the board. They'll be back soon, I'm sure, because now that there's the hire of a new superintendent, we've invited all board members to be here, as we always do. We do this with the city council, we do this with the county legislature, school board. It's an ongoing check-in, and there happens to be a lot of news right now. So I'm going to start with Beatrice LeBron and ask you about this. The big news from last week is the hiring of a new superintendent, and you were one of the 2 no votes. Mm-hmm. Can you explain that vote?
Yeah, I just want to point out that because our board president currently made some comments on record at a board meeting, and I try to clarify some of those comments as well in regards to the fact that the board unanimously voted for a search. In part, that was also because it's part of the state requirement with the state monitor, right? We had to hire someone. The state wanted to ensure that we hired a firm. So it is part of Jaime's plan, if you will, for RCSD. But that was in March of last year. And things have changed dramatically, just even in the last 2 months. And so I'll tell you that in November, right after the election, I was in school last year and I didn't graduate till May. And so it wasn't until after graduation that I myself sat down and read Project 2025 and then sort of thought this couldn't happen. I mean, I knew that legally, strategically, this looked like a plan that could take place in government. I think I was in denial that the election would go the way that it did. But what I will say is that when November elections came, that I started to express interest in wanting to stop the search and sort of start pushing on my colleagues and the state and other electeds in Monroe County and in the state of New York to also read Project 2025 and have some plans of action, something to counter, if you will. And I will tell you, and I said this in one of my own lives, that I felt like the Chicken Little of electeds because, for some people, I've had people tell me, you sound like you're in hysteria, and it's not hysteria. This is really happening in real time right now.
You're talking about Project 2025,
I am talking about
the
Project
details being carried out now.
Yes.
Okay.
And right now we have 42% of the educational goals that Project 2025 has laid out. We haven't even even started to, we haven't even experienced the impact that's coming, right? And some of that impact will impact students with special needs, right? They're trying to remove 504Bs in classrooms, and IEPs are going to be impacted and affected, and even funding for Title I. All of these things are happening and will be taking place. And Democrats are in the minority, and, there's not much that they're doing right now, and that's from my perspective as a Democrat, as someone actively involved. But for me, that is where it was stemming from. And I will tell you that I not only vocally expressed these things, I realized in January that the board was going to continue, and they were not taking anything I was saying, right? It's like when you don't like someone, you're kind of like, yeah, let her talk, but we're still going to do this. And that was the attitude of the board majority. And I'll say the board majority because former President Elliott was not there, but I do not think that she would have voted. I cannot speak for her, but I have had lots of conversations with her, and I think she would have also been a no vote on this as well. But so I wrote a letter in January. That letter was to my board colleagues. I had our board clerk send it out as a memo, so no one can say that they never received that letter. And in that letter, I asked again for them to halt the surge, for us to have plans. This is particularly around refugee and immigrant students. We have the largest number of that population in Monroe County. That is us. We are the only school that has a newcomer program in Monroe County that brings and welcomes families from different countries here. And that program is RIA, the Rochester International Academy. And so I wrote this letter to the board. I did not make it public. Again, the conversations for me at that point in time were to my colleagues. But unfortunately, no one even responded to it. I just want to point that out. I'll absolutely make that first letter public if folks would like. And so then I wrote a second letter to other elected officials. And the big push for me is stability in this district. I could tell you as a board member 7 years in, and I've seen people say that the board is stable. The board hasn't been stable since I've been on the board. There's always been someone new or two coming in, and that has contributed to some of that as well. But we're never going to accomplish anything, that's one, if we don't have stability. But to not have stability when the country at the federal level is unstable right now and is actively being unstabilized, I think it puts us all in a really dangerous position. And the fact remains is that we don't really have real plans for families who are refugee and immigrants. We have things in place. We've been advised by the AG's office. We've been advised by NYSED, the Department of Education, on protocols and policies and things that we can take in place now. For example, ICE agents coming to the school have to have a signed warrant by a judge, making sure that all front, direct staff are aware of what that would look like, that warrant, what it looks like to be signed. But if ICE had all of those things in place, they can still come into the school by law and grab these children and take them. We also know that there are families already taken out of Rochester. We have no idea where those families are at. We have a pregnant mom right now who is denied access to a lawyer right at Rochester Regional Health. These are not issues that the district is exempt from. These are our families being impacted. And so, for me, this is where that was coming from, and wanting stability in the district. I also think that no superintendent's going to come in knowing how to navigate what's happening with Project 2025. And so why have someone from outside who then has to, and I wrote this in my letter, and I just want to point out that we received an email from this new superintendent, but I wrote this in my letter to go again to do a 100-day of listening. We don't need 100 days of listening. Right now is a critical time for us to be taking action and creating contingency safety plans for families and understanding how our families are going to be impacted. Because unfortunately, a lot of the families we served are going to be impacted in multiple ways. Medicaid, SNAP, HUD, which is subsidized housing. All of these things are on the chopping block, and all of these things interact and interface with our families. And so for me, that is where it was coming from. I still stand by my no vote. I do not feel optimistic or hopeful that a new superintendent's going to come in and make a miraculous change for RCSD, again, at a time when the federal government is unstable and actively being destabilized by our current president.
Are you rooting for this new superintendent to succeed?
I am not for or against. My focus right now, Evan, in all actuality, is how do we keep families safe in this community beyond RCSD? Again, the implications. Right now, we have a budget up that expires this Friday. You know, the administration is talking about that if the budget conciliations don't pass, that it's going to be on Dems. They control right now that portion of it. I'm going Friday to march at the Capitol with a number of vets and folks who receive Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security, because all of those benefits are on the chopping block right now.
Well, and I'm going to turn to your colleague in a second. I just want to make sure I understand your position on a couple things here. A year ago, when you were the vice president of the board and you came on this program with the president of the board, and you indicated pretty strongly that you felt that Carmine Peluso was kind of pushed out
Absolutely.
by the actions of board members who acted inappropriately,
100%.
undermined the superintendent.
Yes.
Are you
And-
worried you're going to do the same to this new person
No,
coming in?
absolutely not, because I'm not that type of person. And I think, what's unfortunate too in elected positions, people don't get to see behind the scenes or people's backgrounds and work. I've never worked in a job where I had issues with my colleagues, except for the school board. And I just have to say that. However, that cannot be said about the people I serve with. They have had issues at their jobs. Like, this is a personality issue. I also expressed that in my letter as well to other elected officials to say, hey, the dysfunction is not just only here, it's gotten worse. And that dysfunction will drive individuals out. But no, I don't have anything personal against Dr. Rossner. I do not know him. And I'm going to give him the same respect and support that I have provided to Carmine, to DeMario, and any other superintendent, Terry Dade as well.
Okay. And I want to make sure I also understand. So 2024 plays out. If Vice President Harris had won that election and Project 2025 was essentially not a workable strategy because of who would be in power,
Correct.
would you have approached the superintendent search differently?
Absolutely.
Would you have been open to an outside person coming in?
Absolutely, because we would not be under the constraints that we're under right now at the federal level. We, right now, $880 billion is wiped out of Medicaid. And Medicaid also serves special needs students, even outside of the classroom. So these are ripple impacts and effects, right? And then right now, housing is at risk. Housing, insurance, education, all of these things that
Can you walk and
interface
chew
in
gum
our
at the same
lives.
time, though? Can you say we've got to deal with, as you say, Project 2025, what's happening at the federal level? I think your colleagues would say we absolutely have to deal with that.
But they're not dealing with it.
And we have to choose
But they're not
the right
dealing with it.
superintendent
We have
for the
yet
future.
to have a meeting as a board, to have a direct conversation as a board of what our responsibilities are going to be. And I will tell you right now that, I call the state almost every day. Every day I'm asking about different things. I'm calling the AG's office, having meetings with them to see what positions we can take legally, which ones we won't be able to fight
But you're alleging
legally.
that your colleagues on the board are kind of derelict in duty.
I'm alleging that we have yet to have a conversation as a board, in private or public, about Project 2025 and the implications to our district. If the federal government was to cut us off, we're talking about $247 million at minimum. We would not be able to survive and sustain that. What would be the plans? And I'm not in leadership. And I want to be clear. I didn't run for leadership this year. I did not want to be in leadership. I've never had a desire to be board president. Vice president was stretching it for me as it was. I'm involved in other things. And so my focus is oftentimes stretched out. And I know that I can be just as effective as a regular board member. And I was fine with that. But that is what I'm alleging, that they're yet to be. And the public can see that. The public can look back to board meetings and say, hey, when did they pinpoint, and start having conversations about RCSD's response to Project 2025? It has yet to happen.
Commissioner Santiago, you were the other no vote. Can
Yes,
you
sir.
talk about that decision?
Evan, I explained it around the time that I voted no. I remember my experience as a student around 2020 when it was already an unsettling time nationally and also locally, and experiencing the impacts of superintendent changes during an unstable time. And I remember many times programs like having no ideas when the programs were going to continue, new teachers every other week for classes that we were focused on. Like I remember the instability that it caused during a time that was already unstable. And so I just couldn't make the vote with knowing how the switch in the superintendent could truly impact the stability of the district. And there are currently a lot of plans in place, not even, going off of just the federal level stuff. Locally, there's a lot of things that's going on with the $30 million gap in the budget at the moment. This contract is one of the most expensive contracts that the board has ever passed in the history of the district during a $30 million gap. And so it's just, seeing the plans that's currently in place. You have the F&P that will finally be in the process of being accomplished. That's been a lot of work to get to that place. You have reconstruction. You have a lot of different things that's going on. And so I just believe right now during this time, it wasn't the best decision to create more instability during this time. Usually when you look at the historic problem of this district, it's usually execution. Good plans are made, good initiatives are thought of, goals are made, but the issue is usually execution. And it's hard for somebody to come into a district and learn the district during a time that the district is changing. And that's just the reality. The state has been putting pressure on the district to downsize for years. And then there's also some places where we're kind of stuck where we have to downsize. And so the district is changing. And so it's kind of hard to bring somebody on to catch on the train while the train is moving extremely fast with the debts, with the gaps that we have, with the changes that's going on in the district, and to include the federal changes. And so I just didn't think the instability would be beneficial to the students. And so that's why I voted no. And that was my personal advocacy.
I certainly don't know Dr. Rosser, and look forward to having him on this program when he's here, hopefully quite often. I've said many times I live in Rochester. I think everybody roots for Rochester to succeed. But my job is to examine, what's going on at various government levels. So for you, you're in a position as a board member to say, okay, you agree with your colleague that right now you decided was not the moment to go outside the district. It's too hard to train somebody up. There's too much going on. There's too much chaos. Let's stay with a train that's moving really, really well. That's where you were.
Well, it's
that fair?
consistent. It's consistency.
Okay.
The problem with this district is we have a change in leadership every other year, and it's hard for anything to get completed. And so when you find somebody who is loyal and find somebody who is committed to the work, and was part of creating the plans.
You're talking about interim
the
superintendent.
interim superintendent, yes.
So that would have been your preference to stay with the
I think it was the wisest decision.
Okay.
To remain with the person who was part of creating the plans to now execute the plans instead of bringing an outsider. I just thought it was a unstable decision. And again, from my personal experience as a student, I couldn't vote in favor of it.
And so, certainly I don't know any of the candidates or who was interviewed. I can understand many arguments here. I could understand an argument that says we would agree with you, except for this candidate was so far and above, so skilled, so brought so much to the table that we couldn't say no.
I
don't know.
For me personally, Evan, I have nothing wrong to say about the incoming superintendent. I hope, and I do plan to work with him as he comes on. The reality is the board passed him, and so he will be the superintendent. And so then you have a decision to work with him or to not. And I don't believe I voted no because I didn't want to support instability. And so I don't want to be part of the problem to create more instability afterhand. And so the plan is to work with him, and I did meet him the night of the vote, and I explained to him that it wasn't personal. It was about the students and stability of the students. And the hope is, as we sit down and meet together, we can collaborate,
How did that conversation go between you and him?
It went pretty well. It was very, very short. It was after the vote, so it was a short, interaction.
Is that the only conversation you've had directly with him?
So far, yes. But it was an agreement that we're going to do right by the students. And so, so we both, shook hands and agreed on that. And so the plan is to collaborate. From my personal end, I plan to work with the superintendent. I wish him best. It wasn't personal, but it wouldn't have been my best decision.
He did email us to let us know that he is planning to do a 100-day listening tour.
Well, that's what a lot of new CEOs do.
I know, but this is
for good reason, right?
Do you think we have the time right now? No, we do not have 100 days for a superintendent to be listening when we are in a crisis. And I will tell you, Evan, there are so many people in this community sort of, I'm saying people are either in shock or not fully understanding what's happening. But it's happening. It's like it's really happening in real time right now, and the implications of Project 2025. And we are a community already that struggles with poverty and access to resources, and that is just going to get further compounded in this community.
Were you there to evaluate, to to be part of the interview process?
No.
Commissioner?
So in January, I wrote the letter asking them to
To halt the process.
halt the
but
whole
when
process.
they didn't, why not at least participate in the
No,
interviews?
because I don't want to waste my time, Evan. And I'll be honest, like, again, I said this even in my remarks. At that point, it felt like the board was making decisions for themselves out of ego and not at the best interest of students. And again, the board has not had conversations about project. If they're having them, they have not had them as a full board on record or with the whole board, even in private, because we have not had those meetings. But yeah, there is going to be a lot, unfortunately, and to Commissioner Santiago's point about stability, right before the superintendent vote, the week previously, we had to vote on a school closure. And I said, I'm not voting. I initially told the superintendent I would vote yes on that school closure. And then I went to him that night and said, I'm not going to vote on a school closure for another team who's not going to be here to oversee the implementation. Because in the past, what this district has done is we've had superintendents with plans to close schools, and then they make promises to staff and to families, and then they leave. And no one's here to implement those promises that were made to them. And then it's just further chaos that we're throwing families and students into. So I ended up voting no and put that on record that it would just be another vote like we did with School 44 when Terry Dade was here. We closed School 44 with Terry Dade promising that it was going to be the Southwest Daycare Center pre-K, the same way that we have one downtown, and that never came to fruition.
Commissioner, you want to jump in?
Yeah, and I just want to say, I know that the contract is planned for June, and so I think if the superintendent is going to come in, because I am an advocate for stability in this district, because it's needed. It's one of the most important things in this district. I do hope that he takes time to connect with the community, to connect with leaders, because the hope is that he does stick by his word, as he said in his press conference, that he plans to stay in Rochester. And so if he does plan to stay here, I think it is important to connect with the community, to connect with the students, to make relationships, because I do hope success, because it's about the students, at the end of the day. And so if he can come in and provide stability, I'm here to support him and figure out how that's done. But I think he it's important that he does go out into the community, does those hearing tours, and make those relationships.
And before we set this all aside, because we're going to spend a lot of our second half hour talking about specifically what the commissioners are concerned about. They've talked about Project 25. They talk about the effects of what's happening at the federal level on districts like Rochester. We're going to get into that more in a moment here. You're a veteran of politics now, whether you like it or not.
I know. I hate
and
it.
you've been in politics. You know how tough it can be. And there's going to be times where you're on a side that has the votes, and there are going to be times where you're not.
100%.
And so in this situation, if you decide in January, I'm going to try to put my foot down, and it may not be popular, but I'm going to make it clear to the board that I think we need to go in a different direction. If the board decides that they don't agree, and you don't have the votes, why not at least participate in the interviews? Why not at least say, I'll still be in the room. It's part of the job here, even if I don't think we should be doing this.
Yeah, and I'll also make the letter public if folks want to see it. The first one that went out to them. So again, Evan, to the point of not having plans, and we also cannot tell families that yes, the AG advised us that ICE is going to be stopped at the door, because what the district can't do is stop ICE from taking a student off the bus and entering the district, leaving the district property. We have no control over those things, and we have hundreds of families who right now are not sending their children to school and are afraid.
Because of that
and within
fear.
reason, because we have had families already taken by ICE in this community.
Okay. Now, let's get this other matter. By the way, I'm sure if there's anything more they want to say on the incoming superintendent, they can, but we're going to spend the rest of the hour on other matters here. I think we've covered a lot of the ground there. I want to ask the Commissioner Santiago, because it's now been well reported that your colleague James Patterson has petitioned the state to have you removed. His allegations were that you've acted inappropriately towards him, you've been aggressive verbally, you've used racial slurs, and I want to understand your perspective. I also want to say a couple of things here. We're not going to spend the rest of the hour on this. I want to give him the chance, because this has been public. Mm-hmm. Commissioner Santiago, as long as I've known you, you've talked about putting focus on the students, and I know that you don't feel that this puts the focus on the students.
Absolutely
I also know that there may be legal things that you can or can't say.
Yes.
But to the extent that there's allegations out there, and we'll try to talk to Commissioner Patterson as well about this, I want to give you some space to talk about it.
No, and I do have to be careful, because this is a current open legal process. But I do also want to say that I put in my best effort in the background to be the bigger person and create reconciliation through this issue. And unfortunately, the other commissioner has fabricated a story as a victim with no contribution. When since the beginning of my join on the board, I've been subjected to ageism and to intimidating factors.
Ageism in what way? Explain that a little bit.
Calling me boy, that's one of them, and that's already out there. But he has done it. He did it during that conversation between me and him, and this is not something that he hasn't done before. And so it's stuff like that, and many tactics to kind of intimidate and. And so it's unfortunate that this is how it's going. I do have and plan to have a legal counsel behind myself to advocate and to fight against this claim. But there is a lot more to the story, and because of the legal process, I can't share too much. But there's true evidence that you cannot deny. If there's a video of you being aggressive and running up to somebody, you can't deny that. And I did see the commissioner's interview on News 10, and he made it seem like we were just in close proximity. No, from the stairway up to my face all the way across the hall. And so, I'm not going to share too much, but there's a lot more to this story. Right now in the media, it's only his side, and I'm okay with that because there is a legal process to go through. And so I won't share much more, but I do want to say that I become very... I mean, you've known me since I was like 15 years old. I think that's the first time I joined here. And you've always heard me talk about young people and youth voice and bringing young people to the table and the importance of us during this time where young people are at the spotlight of our contemporary issues, both positively and negatively, that we listen to the young people and that we allow young people to come to the table. And unfortunately, in my experience with certain commissioners, it's just not like that. And it makes me question, how can you serve students and be so intimidated and afraid of a young person who just advocates for young people and tells the truth while doing it? And you've known me all this time. I say it as it is, and because there's a truth to the experience. And I left this district 2 years ago. But in my experience, I've watched a 15-year-old lose his life due to programs and injustices through this education system. One of my friends through middle school, I've saw the beginning of his trends through programs through this district. I experienced many suspensions. I experienced a lot of stuff in this education system. And I come on this board to advocate and to say, hey, like, this is the status quo of this, the status quo of that. We have to stop. And people get offended and people get scared by my advocacy and being able to do it well. And there's pride and there's ego and there's narcissistic tendencies and all of this. And so there's a fight here. And the fight is bigger than just this situation. And again, I did my best to reconcile before anything got public.
Can this be healed going forward? This
I hope
relationship?
so. I still have people from my side reaching out to his side, but they're not getting responses. So it doesn't sound like he's trying to reach reconciliation.
Are you concerned that the state might remove you?
You never know what can happen in these situations.
I'm not concerned. I can answer that.
You don't think that's going to happen,
I do not
Commissioner?
think that the commissioner will remove Santiago for this. I just have to also just say, even on technicality, there's a way to write a legal petition, and it has to meet a certain standard. I don't think that standard is there. That's one. Two, I will say to Isaiah's point, as a witness, it boils my blood as well, because we do want young people at the table, and when we say that, we also have to give them room to learn and grow and be authentically themselves as a young person. I have children older than Isaiah. I tell them that all the time. Like, I have kids who are older than him, and I have kids who are younger than Isaiah. And I do think some of this is generationally too, right? That I'm in the middle generation, if you will, between both of these commissioners. And I have a mother who's 83 years old who said, you have to respect your elders no matter what. Well, that's... In my generation, that's not what I'm teaching my children, because that's not the time anymore. And that's what I think upsets people so much in this day and age, because young people are having their voices heard. Whether adults want to hear it or not, they're going to make sure that they are heard. And I encourage that. This is their future, their generation. And so this notion that just because of my age, I deserve respect, I don't think that's what's,
Well, do you think the commissioner Santiago was disrespected because of his age.
I think he is constantly disrespected by more than one commissioner on the school board because of his age. And I think it's wrong and it's inappropriate and it is a constant battle. And I, on more than one occasion, have heard Commissioner Patterson call him boy. And the thing is that he himself may not recognize it in those moments and times that he's doing it. I just don't understand how someone can victimize themselves either when they themselves can be aggressive. So,
But what I was
Go
saying,
ahead.
what I was saying, Evan, is you never know with these processes how they end. But my advocacy started before I joined this board, before I got elected, and no matter where this goes, my advocacy doesn't end. And if anything, right now being on this board, trying to be diplomatic, and trying to be, as collaborative as possible. I've had to hold back from truly advocating in ways that I know that I can, that I've done before I joined the board. And so removal, I don't think, removal will really just ignite a lot more in my advocacy about education. And certainly now that I have experience on the school board and the systematic issues, and I've been able to gain some knowledge, it will be a lot more organized and the advocacy would be a lot different. And so no matter how this ends, my advocacy and what I do is not going to stop because it was there before I got elected. My identity was there before I got elected. My character was there before I got elected. And it's still going to be here even when this term ends, if I decide to run for re-election or if I don't.
All school board members, including Commissioner Patterson, are invited on this program, and I'm sure we'll have a lot more to talk about. Closing the book on this, and then what we're going to do, we'll take a break, and we're going to close on chapter, I keep saying chapter 2025, Project 2025. It's a chapter. We have two commissioners on the Rochester City School Board, Beatrice LeBron and Isaiah Santiago, who acknowledge that their preference for how the district was going to handle the new superintendent did not go the way they wanted. They're also describing some really fraught relations that, for a board that has a history going back multiple generations now of, I think everyone would agree, dysfunction. I don't know if it gives the public this idea that, well, we've turned a corner. And I know that you and Cynthia Elliott a year ago were hopeful that the board was moving in that better direction. Are you less hopeful now? And what is it going to take for the board to be able to work together constructively?
Oh, I am less hopeful now. And I don't know what it's going to take because you have people who are there with not the best intentions for families. And I just have to also point out, right, that urban education, it is very unique and different from other education systems. And when you have commissioners who have no experience with urban education, they never went through it, they never lived it, they're just sort of coming from an outside perspective thinking that they are going to come in and save us in the urban communities. We don't need saving. What we need is our own people to wake up and save ourselves. But when they have that mentality of, it's almost like an elitist type of mentality that I'm here to save you, not serve you. And so, no, I feel less hopeful.
Are you talking about your colleagues?
Yes, absolutely. I'm talking about my colleagues. There are people on the school board who have never raised children in this district or any other urban school district. There are people who currently don't have kids in this
system. But can't they be effective? Can't they care?
They can care, but you have to also understand urban school districts are vastly different from suburban school districts. And if that is the only experience you have, then you have to understand that you're coming into our environment. We didn't go to his environment. You came into ours. And so there are some things that occur in the urban school districts that are part of our norm that he or she may not see as like norm essentially, but unfortunately it is. And some things are good and some things are bad. It's part of life, for us. So I do think that as we move forward, I know that from the outside looking in, it often does look like myself or even Commissioner Santiago. And that's because you see us in our authentic selves. How we are on the board in public is how we are behind the scenes, versus some commissioners who will be up there and are quiet or don't have much to say, but behind the scenes, they're causing havoc and harassing of staff and families and all kinds of things. And I just want to uplift and make this last point before we wrap up on this portion of it, because I've seen this about the cost of us paying for Commissioner Santiago to have representation. And I would ask the public to start answering how much has the school board paid for legal representation of these other commissioners who are currently in power, because we have had to pay for a number of them for all types of investigations and some of their direct behaviors that have been harmful to the entire district. And I can promise you and assure you that it is way more money than we're paying for legal defense on Commissioner Santiago.
Commissioner, go ahead.
I think, in my opinion, I still remain optimistic, at least in the sense that there's an election year coming up. My hope is that there are educated votes, and there is a different loyalty or a different dedication from somebody who grew up in the district, or somebody who currently has children in the district, or somebody who has past experience in the district. And there's or grew up in this city. There's a loyalty, a different type of loyalty from those people compared to some people who may not have grown up in the district. And many times you see, that their arguments is about positions, powers, and politics, and you don't hear much about students from them and from their advocacy. And so that just shows their priorities, and their priorities isn't as loyal to the people who may have grown up from this district or have current district students here. And so I just think as long as we can get people with values and who's willing to work together, even through disagreements, I think there are possibilities for this board to work together. But it will take that. But then you also have a decision during this time. The education system has been failing young people for years, on decades. This system has been failing people. And so we have to make a choice whether we're about to innovate and reform this district, or if we're going to have to start from the jump and think about how is this board even contributing towards the direction of this district. And if there's issues, at the end of the day, Evan, and I'm going to say this, I'm on this board for one term. That's the only thing that's promised to me unless I get removed from this situation. And there's I don't have, besides other people may think, I don't have all these political aspirations. If there's a change that needs to happen, and I know that it's going to change this district, I'm going to stand behind it 100%. And so we just have to look at the options as far as how this board is going to move, because it's beyond past time. It's not like this is not the perfect time. We should have been trying to change the system and figuring out how to reform and innovate the system to really succeed our children for generational success and succeed our children in interests of what they want to learn. And this is the problem. When you have this drama on the board, this becomes a focus. But not how do we reform this education so we can start succeeding the children in this city, which will affect the city, which will affect our poverty rates, which will lead us to generational success. But the focus is on drama. And it can't be that no more. We have to focus on reforming. And either there's going to be people on this board who's going to be good with reforming and innovating the education system during this time, or there's not. And we're going to have to talk about how do we move forward? Where does the community feel this education system has been? Because the community is upset right now also with how this education system has continued to fail. So what does the community think is the best option? And if there's people on the board who's not willing to reform and to innovate, then the people is going to have to stand up, because our education is the most important part. This is the foundation of everything. If we can get the education right, some of our other issues that we're trying to soothe and temporarily satisfy could be actually resolved. We're talking about, and in these conversations, we have to talk about true and honest solutions. Some of these solutions that people propose are not true and honest to what young people need. And so if we're not talking about those true and honest solutions, I don't want part of the conversation. I think that's why a lot of people don't like me, and I'm okay with that.
Let's take our only break. When we come back with Commissioner Santiago and LeBron, we're going to talk about what some of those specific points would be. If Commissioner Santiago had the keys to the castle of RCSD, what are some of the immediate changes? Commissioner LeBron is talking about wanting to be in position as a district to deal with what's going on federally. What is not happening, what has to happen now? We'll talk about that on the other side of this only break.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Bob Johnson Auto Group, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson. Believing an informed public makes for a stronger community. BobJohnsonAutoGroup.com.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. One point of agreement, there's no question there's agreement among the president, the vice president of the city school board who were on this program a few weeks ago, and the commissioners who are on the program today, is that there are families in Rochester not sending their kids to school right now because of concerns about what's going on with ICE.
Correct.
And that there are kids who are scared. And beyond that, or tied to that, Commissioner LeBron is saying what is happening at the federal level should cause this district to move into kind of a crisis mode, and you haven't seen that. So what does that look like? Right now, if this board is going to do what you want it to do, what does it do? Give me some steps.
So one of the things I actually mentioned right after the November between November and December, I was still VP. I just want to point that out because even in that position, I was doing some advocacy around putting us in a state of emergency to allow the administration to make very quick plans, especially around ICE, for example. In the beginning, we've never had to train all of our staff to say, hey, this is what a signed petition looks like. Here's who has authority. And one of the executive orders, I just want to point out, made it so that schools, hospitals, and churches are no longer safe places. So essentially, ICE was not allowed before to go into those spaces. Churches.
To detain?
Yes. And that is a major change. So churches are no longer a sanctuary place. In the past, churches can bring folks in and say, this is a sanctuary space. You're not allowed here. You can't come in. And it was always respected. We no longer have that. What we have is the ability to identify certain areas and mark it as private, and it has to be specifically mentioned. And it's a big change for us, but that is just a small change. Again, we have families right here, right now, who have already had contact with ICE, who have already been taken and separated, and we have no idea where those individuals are. And the immigration and refugee community in Rochester is not as big as people think it is, and the word spreads very fast that ICE is out and about. And so right now, all of those families, I've had families contact me and say, well, the principal said that there's a protocol in place. Yeah, there's a protocol to stop ICE at the door to double check that the warrant that they have is signed and it's legal and it's good. And if it is, then yes, they have to still let that ICE agent in. And so making sure families understand that just because we have a protocol in place does not mean that we can stop ICE. We cannot stop ICE.
So what should you do?
My advocacy is that the state allows us to go virtual for families who are unsure. I want to point out that there were a number of refugee families that came under the MRAP classification, if you will, from Venezuela, and that one of the executive orders now makes all of those families who were here legally illegal in 30 more days. There was a 90-day turnaround for those families to lose that status. There are green card holders also at risk. What I would do right now is work on educating our staff and our employees on all of these things and having an understanding and assessing what statuses our families have, because immigration is very big and convoluted, but immigration is just one piece of this. Coming up next is going to be a federal Bill of Rights, which sounds great, but it is in partnership with Moms of Liberty at the federal level.
That's a very conservative group.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, some of the things that they want to roll out through the federal government, through this, National Bill of Rights, people should be concerned, right? Because it doesn't align with a lot of our own beliefs or urban education. The 504, right now there are 17 states suing the federal government to eliminate 504s, but that is also part of Project 2025. They want to eliminate IEPs and special services for children who have ADHD and autism and so forth. And I don't think we're prepared, and I think we should be educating our families. And let me just say this, that my criticism is to the entire Democratic Party, not just like the school board. They are one portion of it. I have also internally argued with my colleagues to say I need them to step up. I need the county executive. I will tell you, the only person that I'm going to extra meetings myself to educate people and churches and groups and so forth, to have these conversations, to highlight what they should be looking at, what everyone could be doing right now. But I do believe that this is something that even above me should be the party leading these conversations, and not just one or two elected officials out here in the community interfacing with families. And families are fearful, as they should be. They should be fearful because, again, there's another executive order that if we intercede, we're going to be federally prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney General, just for assisting a family that they are deemed as illegal. And so understanding those things, instead of there is a board member, I won't say who put out a status on Facebook that said an executive order is like a resolution. It has to go through No, it's not a resolution. It's please stop miseducating the public about what's happening in these processes. And I do think that what we as a board could be doing right now is holding workshops and information sessions about what's happening, what's coming down the pipeline, how this can impact you. And I will tell you, we don't have answers. And that is my biggest frustration, is that we don't have answers. And I'm frustrated that elected officials at the entire state level, at all levels of government, had the same opportunity as the rest of us to read Project 2025, and they should have read it, and they should have had a contingency plan on how they were going to fight some of these things, but they didn't.
Is there some momentum toward allowing for virtual classes for students who are worried about detention?
It's a conversation happening right now with the state, yes.
Okay.
We don't
So it
know
could
what
happen.
the state, it could happen. It really essentially falls on NYSED. And then there's some other things, because if we don't pivot into that way, families are going to just not send their children. And I just want to point that out, that at the end of it will just be a child that no longer has access to education and information. And that will be a tragedy and unfortunate.
Commissioner Santiago, do you agree with some of the points of your colleague here?
I think there's a lot going on, there's a lot going on currently, with the country, and I'm of course I'm watching everything that's going on, and always looking at what are the ways to kind of advocate, and right now the real, only field that we can go down is through law. As far as how to challenge the president, as far as threats for taking away fundings and things of that sort. But I think right now we're in a challenging time, and so there's certain things that we have to be prepared for, and we also have to be ready for the impacts that will have afterhand. And I think it is important that we prepare. For some of these things that we may be seeing coming. There's been warnings, on those things. And so we just have to be prepared and ready, because I think all we could really do, besides join lawsuits and challenge the president through those alleys, is figure out how can we really lighten the blow as much as possible towards the district. And there might be ways to do that. I know for funding for lunches, there's a state grant for farms to tables. Like, there's opportunities that we'll be able to take, and we just have to be strategic as far as how we do that. Because the reality is, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. But what are we going to do in response to that to make sure our students are covered?
So if you could get a chance to really move forward with a number of innovations that you've talked about that students desperately need, that they're not getting from RCSD right now, what's at the top of the list?
Well, I think altogether is, of course, literacy is always important, but it's also making sure that our young people are prepared for the world after they leave, the district. And I think that a lot of times that's not the thought. How are we graduating these children with certificates that they may be able to get a job to financially support themselves while they're in college? How do we give, our young people an opportunity to have lived experiences while in high school and obtain credits while doing that? Whether that's through internships, whether that's through CTE, whether that's through, and how are we graduating our students with certificates? Again, that's going to get them the high paying jobs.
Is that happening?
I believe it's not happening, and we're not being strategic with it neither. I think we should be taking data on what are our young people interested in while they're joining high school. How do we pique their interest? That will solve a lot of issues in attendance. That will allow our young, like when you give a young person a chance to express themselves, a way that they have their own gifts, the way that they express what they've learned, the way that, and every young person is different, we have an opportunity to really push young people to the next level. And so I just believe it's just the preparation for life. And I'm telling you, after graduation, I've been talking to a lot of friends who's had to drop out, whether because they weren't prepared for college and the workload was too much for them, or had to drop out because they couldn't financially support themselves. Like, these are things that the district could really give tools for our young people as they graduate to support themselves during this time. But there's a lot of issues that we have to focus on culturally. How are we engaging students? How are we engaging parents in their students' education? And then also there are disparities that our young people in our community goes through that's important that our other municipal governments support in. The job of the district is to educate, and we have to be able to educate. But we also need support from the outside on how are we supporting these young people during their disparities and getting them across the finish line successfully for generational success.
So part of the attendance challenge, you think, is just kids don't feel that the district is
There's a lot of
engaged in their
things.
future.
No, there's a lot of things. I think sometimes there are concerns that young people have that's not being met while they're in school, whether it's because they don't feel comfortable with a certain student in the classroom, or they're being bullied, or they're getting, like, I believe at a lot of times those things aren't being met, and their needs to really for resolution in that issue aren't being met. But then you also have some who aren't interested in what's going on in school. And then you have, so there's a lot of different things to it. But I remember when I was in school, when I knew I had my photography program after school, I made sure I was in school. You know, when I knew I had this class that focused on public speaking, and I loved public speaking, I was in school to get that class. And I think we have to think outside the box then. This is English, this is science, this is math. No, how do we really start going into that and really like prepare our young people for college, and if they don't decide to go to college, to have the tools for them, not only for the current contemporary job market, but also the future job market, so we can have our young people ahead and making money and being successful in their future.
Well, as we get ready to wrap here, we're going to be certainly following what the district does in regards to, as Commissioner LeBron has been saying, Project 2025 and related issues. Let me squeeze in one question with 30 seconds to go. Jenna says, on the topic of superintendents staying in Rochester, why are we not tying the compensation package of the superintendent to their having to stay long term? It seems they are all able to leave prematurely with very generous severance packages. Is that just my perception? That's from Jenna.
No, that is correct. And this superintendent negotiated a good severance package for himself also. Again, I want to uplift that our current interim did apply. He did go through the process. And I know you asked me, like, why not even participate? In the January letter, I was very clear. The only vote I would have given to was for Demario Strickland, because Dr. Strickland is competent and capable, and someone that our faculty and staff and our families really liked and respected. So.
Have you met the incoming superintendent?
Yes, I met him the same day that we voted.
Okay. Short conversation, I assume?
Very short conversation as well.
Longer conversations to come?
Absolutely.
I want to thank our guests for being here. This is part of an ongoing series of conversations with our elected leaders, and the school board always invited. Beatrice LeBron, Rochester City School Board Commissioner, thank you for being here, Commissioner.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Isaiah Santiago, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
More connections coming up in a moment.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Excellus Blue Cross Blue Shield, with a mission to address health inequities by building up communities and breaking down health barriers. Excellus Blue Cross Blue Shield, everybody benefits. More at excellusbcbs.com.